discipline, but also focusing on the good examples and use cases. Let me welcome our honorable guest speakers and you, the audience, for whom we are here for today. My name is Natalia Galica. I will be the moderator of the event today. I'm Open Science Officer at National Science Center, Poland. I also, our agency is a mandated organization for EOSC Association in Poland, but also a partner of EOSC Focus project. But let me introduce briefly the agenda for today. And then I will give a voice to our speakers. So we will start from Dr. Ingrid Dilo from DANS, Data Archiving and Network Services. Then we will move to Diana Kosanovic, who is from the University of Belgrade, but who is also opener node for Serbia. Then the floor will be given to Professor Dragan Ivanovic from the University of Novi Sad. Who will be followed by Majka Verburg from DANS, and DANS will be represented again. Then we will present the OPUS project. There will be two speakers representing the project, Gareth O'Neill and Dr. Alina Irimia. Finally, we will have an open discussion where we hope for more interaction with the audience, with you as participants, asking us challenging questions regarding open science and research assessment and the Serbian context. And finally, last but not least, we will have a word from Joy Davidson from Digital Curation Center in the UK, presenting Fair Impact Open calls. So let me give the voice to our first speaker of today, Dr. Ingrid Dilo, who is an executive project manager at Data Archiving and Network Services, DANS, in the Netherlands. She's very experienced working in the field of policy development for the last 30 years, including senior policy advisor at Dutch Ministry of Education, Culture and Science. She also worked for National Library of the Netherlands. So with this broad experience, she brought this broad experience into the Fair Impact project, and now she will introduce us the project in more details. Ingrid, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and thank you for the nice introduction. I'm very excited to be here this morning, and I'm very happy to give you a short introduction to the Fair Impact project. May I have the next slide? So I think this project is very nicely placed in this context of the discussion around research assessment and certainly open science in Serbia, because I think open science, as we all know, consists of different elements, and I've shown here some of them on the screen. Open science is, of course, very much about using transparent research practices, being open and trustworthy. It's about open access publishing. A lot is happening in that area. But another very important component of open science is data sharing, or more broadly, the open sharing of research outputs. And that open sharing of research outputs is really at the heart of what we are doing in this European project, Fair Impact. Fair Impact is a project that is running for 3 years, and we're almost halfway. And it involves a budget of 10 million euro, and we're working together with 28 partners in Europe to make this happen. Can I have the next slide? So what is the overall objective of this project? Well, Fair Impact is really focused on providing support for the implementation of fair enabling practices, tools, and services. And we try to do that across scientific communities, which means that we try to bring solutions from one area, from one domain or discipline to the other. What we also try to do is not only look at data, but also look at other outputs that need to be more fair. So you can think there of software, and we also do a lot in the area of semantic artifacts, so vocabularies, ontologies, metadata schema. This support reaches hopefully different levels. So next to the European level, we also try to reach out to the national level, as we are doing today in Serbia, and even the institutional level. On this slide, you also see the logo of another European funded project called FAIR's Fair, because FAIR's Fair was really the predecessor of Fair Impact. So a lot of the work that was done in FAIR's Fair is continued in this new project. So this might also be an interesting place for you to look if you're interested in fair solutions. Next slide. So the overall objective is supporting the implementation of FAIR. And how do we do that? Well, we try to engage with a very wide range of stakeholders who really facilitate researchers to use FAIR practices. So there you can think of research performing organizations, data repositories, all kinds of other data services. So a broad range of service providers that help researchers in their FAIR practices. What we try to do is, like I said, take certain solutions that exist in one domain, adapt them so that they become implementable for other domains. And you can think there of tools and technical specifications, but also very much about certain recommendations, practices, and policies. So it's a broad range of FAIR enabling components that we focus on. We also try to provide support mechanisms and coordination and governance mechanisms, because we want to make sure that these FAIR enabling solutions will also continue to function when the project is ended. And we have that European Open Science Cloud. So that is really the place where we expect all of these solutions to live into the future. Next slide. So when we talk about FAIR enabling solutions for researchers, we need to be aware that we still have a long way to go, and that there is still a lot of work for all of us in these communities. Here you see the outcome of a survey that was done last year amongst 15,000 researchers in Europe, and it shows you the awareness of FAIR. And you can see here that about 2/3 of the researchers answered that they have some level of familiarity with the FAIR principles, but still more than 1/3 of them had never heard of them. And only 1 out of 5 puts them in practice, because that is, of course, another thing. You can say that I'm losing my screen here, just a moment. Something weird happened there. You can say that it's probably not such a big thing that researchers do not know the acronym FAIR, but it is important that they use practices in their research that really, let's say, materialize those FAIR practices. So if we go to the next slide, what does it mean to be fair as a researcher? What kind of practices do you need to apply? Well, for example, it would be good if you release a data set with a license. Here you can see that almost half of the researchers in Europe has never done that. Being fair also means that you acquire a persistent identifier for your data. Here you can see that almost half of the researchers have never done that. So this really shows that there is still a lot of work that we need to do in Europe. Next slide. So going back then to the project, here you see the structure of the project. We have a couple of what we call pillar work packages that focus on certain elements within the FAIR approach. So one is focused on persistent identifiers, another one on metadata and ontologies, and a third one on metrics, certifications, and guidelines for fairness. And next to that, we have 2 cross-cutting projects, work packages, one on interoperability and one on engagement, adoption, and implementation. That is really where the support activities happen. Next slide. This is a slide I'm not going to dive in, but I imagine that you will get the slide deck, and here you can see the key results that we expect to get after we finish this project. So maybe nice for reference. Next slide. I wanted to dive a little bit into the methodology that we use. So, like I said, we try to identify solutions that already exist that we take from one domain to others. And we have 4 domain-specific partners with resource in the project with whom we work to make this happen. So we have a partner from the social sciences and humanities, from the photon and neutron sciences, from life sciences, and from the agri-food sector. So that shows you that there is a diverse range of domain partners in the project with whom we will co-design solutions and share their solutions with other domains. Next slide. Next to that, we try to cast the net wider. So we also go outside of the partners of the project, also with some funding through 2 routes. So the first route is an in-kind support route, in which we provide dedicated guidance to organizations who are interested in improving their fairness, and one-on-one support. So we have open calls where organizations in Europe are invited to apply to receive guidance from partners in the project in their journey to make their practices more fair. Next to that, we also have cascading grants. So that means that we have money available. People can get some funding to fund hours that they use, for example, to test and implement specific tools and approaches and solutions for FAIR that are offered by the project. We also have a series of public FAIR implementation workshops. There is one going on right now. So that is openly available for everybody. The support, both in terms of funding and in-kind support, is organized in different open calls that we organize within the project. So 2 of them are already ongoing. Another 3 will follow next year, as you can see on this slide. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that at the moment there is a call open for support. So this is a call where applicants that are successful can receive in-kind support from partners in the project, focused on implementing FAIR practices. And we have 3 strands for 3 different stakeholders: the research performing organizations, repositories and service providers, and national level initiatives. And the deadline for these calls is the 1st of November. And at the end of this webinar, there will be some more detailed information from my colleague Joy. Next slide. Another activity that we do in the project is that we organize what we call synchronization workshops. And in these workshops, we invite all FAIR and EOSC related projects, the EOSC Association and its task forces, and also other initiatives around Europe to sit together and to take stock of all of the developments in these topics, in these areas, and also to identify then gaps and possible synergies. And all of this to make sure that we don't reinvent wheels and that we align and work as efficiently as possible in all of these areas. So this is the second round of workshops that will take place from November to February next year. And I think with that, I come to the end of my short introduction to the project. I thank you very much, and I wish you a very successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid, for giving us the insight into the project to see what are you aiming at and what are the opportunities for all of us, which we can take from your project and for your activities. We are already taking, thanks to participating in this webinar today. But now I would like to give a floor to Biljana Kosanovic, who is the information specialist working at the University of Belgrade. She's also an Open Air National Coordinator for Serbia since 2013. She's very experienced in coordinating groups and projects focusing on the implementation of open science strategy in Serbia at both national but also institutional level. She established Serbian Library Consortium for Coordinated Acquisition, but also DOI Serbia, DOIS Serbia project for assigning DOIS. So now, Biljana, the screen is yours. Thank you.
The screen and the floor is mine.
Exactly.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So let's think about my presentation as an overall picture of what Serbia did in the past few years, and in the field of open science and fairness, and how the big national project use this data. So my presentation will be in that way and completely based on the data in Serbian. Okay, so the biggest project which we are working on now is eNauka project. It is a national CRIS system, current research information system, and this is something what decision maker wants to have. There are few attempts in the previous year in the history to establish something on the national level with some good, some bad results, some good and bad outcomes. But 2 years ago, the government made a decision, put public tender. So, and the result of this is this portal, which is, of course, information, basic information on researcher, organization results, and in the future about the project. But the base of this national CRIS system lay on the fact that in the last 5 years, a huge number of institutions, scientific performing institutions, decided and recognized the need to have their repositories. At the first time, they recognized that they need a repository of publications. But after that, some of institutions, especially those ones who are involved in European Commission projects, they improve these repositories in hybrid ones, which means they also deposited data, scientific data in their repositories. This is especially important for the Faculty of Chemistry or for the Institute of Chemical Technology and Metallurgy, and also for the Serbian Academy of Science, which are special, interesting example because they are working in humanities. So their kind of data is a little bit different. We are talking there about pictures, etc. But they have an infrastructure where to put their results, including data sets. Not all of these repositories include or use this opportunity to deposit also the data, but some of them have, and they have a chance, because on the national level, we do not have some special data repositories. But we try to, with this growing number of repositories, we are achieved another goals. Let's say one of the goals, we have now a very large number of trained librarians. We now have the people who knows that they have to move to the data stewards and that kind of things. The institutions adopted policies. Below this line, there are institutions who adopted open science policy on the institutional level. Okay, we have it on the national level, little bit old, and we have a new version on the national level, but I recognize that the knowledge in the institutions and the recognitions of how important is that research results are open, they are coming through all these infrastructures. And all this infrastructure was developed having a very large help and a huge help of the open air project, which we are part of for years. So when the government started to think about national CRIS system, we use this I from fair quite high, and we insist to have all this data interoperable. I will show you through the slide where we use persistent identifiers as much as we could do, because me personally, but also my team, we recognize that persistent identifiers is something which is really stable, and they are here not just to archive the results, publications, data sets on the, let's say, trustable location, but also they are here to make this interoperability happen. So, and on every entity which is usually exists in every CRIS system, we insisted to connect or to put as much PIDs as we could do. Let's say, just few examples. For the researchers, we insisted that all researchers must have ORC-ID as their identifier. How we realize that? We realize that researchers are logging authenticated on the eNauka system using their ORC-ID credential. Of course, we have to become a member of ORC-ID organization to use this possibility, but we insisted, and we see that number of ORC-ID from the researcher from Serbia grow. This is good because science, as we all know, is an international thing. The researcher in the 21st century must have their ORC-IDs, but it's some kind of pressure. Okay, you have to open your ORC-ID profile if you want to log into eScience. This is just for example. So a lot of our researcher has an eCRIS. This is a Slovenian system used in our libraries for cataloging as a library catalog, and there are also researchers has their IDs there, but now they are connected, all of them. We of course put the researcher ID from the Web of Science and the Scopus. I don't like it, but you know, in the scientific community, it is quite important to be recognized also in that kind of sources, etc. For the organizations, we of course introduce ROR identifier. A lot of organizations did not know that ROR exists, but it exists. So, and now there are organizations who are asking how to apply it to have a ROR. Of course, also European Commission pick that kind for the organization. But a majority of our PIDs are on the publications. Of course, DOI is present on every publication they have, but also the others. But I will show a little bit details exactly on this screen. So the eNauka is not a repository. In eNauka is a CRIS, which means catalog of results with huge number of links, okay, with the stable URLs to the repository where the result is coming, because the full text publications, green or gold or whatever, they are deposited in institutional repositories. But we equipped every article with the persistent identifiers. In that way, we could use this nice kind of tools which will not exist without open science initiatives. Let's say open citations we use for all publications which have a DOI as the metadata. They could collect open citations. So, and the same is for the unpaywall. Of course, Scopus is not important. Altmetric influence mentioned on the social networks and that kind of things. So, and in that way, we are finding, let's say, this small road to introduce the decision makers that Web of Science and Scopus is not the only source on information of the research output. And this is particularly important for the small scientific community like Serbia is. And also it is very important for the researchers who are working in the social science and humanities, especially in humanities, because all of us know that they are not present in these big international sources. Another way how we introduce openness, again, to those who are making the decision, on every screen, we could try to put something about open. Usually we use this orange color, as we all know. Orange is a color of the open access and open science. Okay, and as you can see, we have a logo also here with some orange here. Okay, so on the every entity level, let's say of the institution, but the same is on the organization level, we have, let's say, this small bar, okay, having an giving the results, how open the results of this particular researcher, how open his results is. Okay, and also here in all these kind of citations, we also put this open citations, and also these coming from Dimensions, PubMed Central, etc. So this is the reason how we try to introduce this openness and interoperability through to the Serbian scientific community, and especially for those officials who have to make some decisions. Okay, and what is the impact of all these on the research assessment? Nowadays, situation is here that everybody is complaining about this research assessment based on impact factor. Everybody, not everybody, but 95% of researchers are claimed about that. But if there is no people who are interested to change this, the fact is that no interest from Serbia, nobody from Serbia showing the interest for joining this coalition for advancing research assessment, COARA. Personally, myself offered to our rector office, I see maybe this is a future, it will be good for somebody to join this, but no interest. There are some, let's say, projects which are institutions for Serbia are participating and who are working something about this research integrity and research assessment. I mentioned here two of them, University of Novi Sad, Dragan Technical University, and also GraspOS Open Science Faculty of Chemistry. But this is, let's say, small initiative, just trying to be well informed what is happening in the, let's say, broader research community. We are all aware that and we are trying, we will also put some of this on this eScience portal, eNauka portal, about peer reviewing, about data sets. Exactly, this is my last slide. Okay, and data sets. Okay, and what is our main challenging? Of course, all this is not free of charge, especially open science is not free of charge. Government funded a eNauka portal, but they do not funding IT infrastructures or continuing education of librarians on the institution level. So I think that we have to find the way how to use these projects which are interested for the government to promote all these new things. And of course, I will not complain, but what we all missing, not only the money, but we also missing quite a lot, ITs, data librarians, proactive decision makers, etc. Okay, thank you. I know that I'm 1 minute longer than I will practice more next time. Sorry.
It was absolutely excellent. Thank you, Viljana, for this insight into the open science of the Republic of Serbia, but also the eNauka program and all your efforts you are doing and the outcomes of it. And it's not about complaining, because we are all sharing the challenges of it. So we do understand that. And I think especially the widening countries, they have very specific context, and maybe during the open discussion, we will have more time to talk about the specificity of the implementation, because we can see from your presentation that you put huge effort to launch, let's say, structural solutions for open science. But as we all know, structural, this is the one thing. Then we have obviously the research culture, then we have institutional issues, and they are very different, not only in the national context, but also from institution to institution very often. So thank you very much. Hopefully we will be able to come back to this point in the discussion. But now I would like to welcome Professor Dragan Ivanovic from the University of Novi Sad, who is a research software engineer in the Faculty of Technical Sciences. He has a huge experience working with Common European Research Information Format, serif-based systems development in the context of EU-funded projects for Eurocris, sorry. He is a specialist in data analysis, data modeling, research information system, but also digital and data repositories. Today he will present a GraspOS project as open science responsible research assessment approach landscape. Okay, Dragan, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Natalia. I hope you can hear me well and you can see my slides.
Yes, we can see you and the slides.
Yes, thank you very much for a nice introduction. Hello, everyone. So I'm not going to present some Serbian initiative. This is the European project, GraspOS project. Viljana already mentioned that, some of her slides. It's about the next generation for research assessment for promotion of open science practices. And I will try also to put this project in the context of Serbian Research Academy and how it might have some impact on our development of open science paradigm in Serbia. So just briefly about the project, some general goal of the project is to try to support the emerging policy reforms and pave the way towards an open science aware responsible research assessment system. So which means we need some reforming of the policies across Europe to more, let's say, award and recognize the open science practices. Besides that, the project is also the infrastructure project, which means it's going also to develop some software infrastructures to support, let's say, the research assessment, which is promoting the open science. However, the project is still in the first year, so it started at the beginning of this year. And so far, the landscape analysis has been completed. And there is some initial proposal of the software architecture of the tools which should be developed as part of this project. And also one important aspect of this project will be also the OSAF, which is the acronym for Open Science Assessment Framework. It should give some guideline to the policy makers and decision makers how to, let's say, align its own research assessment in accordance with the open science paradigm and some new results in this field. All results of the project you can find in the eNauka communities for this project, which is provided at this link, and I think the slides will be shared at the end of this day with all participants in this webinar. So basically, firstly, I'm going to present the only result which is published so far, which I participated in. It's landscape analysis, which has been completed. And after that, I will try to just briefly mention how this is fitting in the Serbian context and who is representative in this project from Serbia and which impact might this project could have on the, let's say, the Serbian academic landscape. So I took part in this Open Science Survey Research Responsible Research Assessment landscape report. I'm actually hired in this project as an expert by TSV from Finland. And the goal of this, let's say, landscape analysis was actually to make something useful for the rest of the project, which will be a basic for the rest step in the project. So we wanted to identify current open science assessment practices across Europe. So the open sciences exist for some period, and some institutions or governments started some application of, let's say, stick or carrot approach for applying and open science practices. Then we also wanted to identify how much the qualitative and quantitative approach has been used across Europe, meaning how many of that is based on some metrics and how many of that is based on some review process. And then we also, let's say, analyzed some software, let's say, bottleneck and what should be improved there as well, what should be developed there to support, let's say, the complete process. The report, the landscape report I am presenting, is available also in the eNauka community, and here you can find also the DOI for the link. Regarding the methodology, basically we use the desk research, which means we, let's say, search over the internet about available resources, try to contact some persons when we find some contact point for some project or some initiative and try to get more details and so on. But also we organized two types of surveys. One was the global survey and one was pilot organization surveys, because there are 9 pilots in the project itself, which should give us, let's say, realistic scenarios in which, let's say, research assessment which promote open science should be used. Regarding the desk research, we identified 300, almost 400 resources. Some of them was the result of some previous knowledge of the project participants. Then, based on that, we tried to search the citation database by using some keywords of the project. Then we tried also to follow some social network activities, some Twitter, let's say, accounts and so on, to find more details about some interesting resources. And also we try, let's say, to make some network of resources by using, the mentioning, by using the citation, which means in some citation database, if something is interesting result for us for analysis. We try also to follow who cited that resource or which resources that certain publication cited. Then we classified all those, we identified resources and analyzed further in more details. Regarding the surveys, the pilot surveys included 20 old questions about the respondents' background, assessment framework and policies, which are actually the certain institution is supporting or adopting. Then quantitative and qualitative criteria and practices in its own research assessment. So institutional research assessment procedures. And then also the software infrastructure which exists at that pilot organization or which is used if in the case that some global infrastructure is used, such as Web of Science, Scopus, or whatever. It was launched in March, and we were lucky that we had, as I said, 9 representatives in a project, pilot organizations, which provided us their responses and state-of-the-art. Then we also tried to, let's say, modify that slightly to make it global for anyone interested to participate. It was included 49 questions about, again, some respondents' background, just that we can give better context of responses. Then assessment framework and policies, and again, quantitative and qualitative criteria and practices, and again, about the software infrastructure. It was launched in May, and we collected 54 responses. We tried, let's say, to organize in the same way both surveys and also our desk research, meaning we tried, let's say, to organize the responses, in some groups as some initiatives, assessment frameworks and policies, some quantitative and qualitative criteria and practices used across Europe, and some software infrastructures gaps or some existing software infrastructure which might be useful in this transition to research assessment, which will promote the open science applications. And just briefly, the key findings, as I said, we try to organize that in those sections. So regarding some initiatives, there is a lot of initiatives, some of them already mentioned in Biljana presentation, such as Quora. So there are different perspectives of those initiatives. When we define the initiative, it might be, some organizations network, or some project, or just some, let's say, memorandum of understanding, or some initiatives which you can sign, or something similar. So anything which is in any aspect trying to promote the open science and research assessment, let's say, which is promoting the open science practices. In a lot of those initiatives, the open science is recognized as a really important part of the initiative. Regarding some policies and frameworks, there is a rich space of policies and frameworks across Europe. It's already in place, and it can be useful for us for this project, for making this open science assessment framework as some kind of the guideline or recommendation or some starting point from which we can start in definition of the open science assessment framework. So that open science assessment framework should include some guideline to the policymakers and decision makers how to proceed further and how to include, let's say, how to introduce the open science paradigm in the research assessment process. Regarding some qualitative and quantitative approaches, the criteria used in research assessment, basically both approaches have some benefits and limitations. And some conclusions of our analysis was that it should be used in combined way, which is not so easy. But basically, I think we should use some qualitative, let's say, the committee-based review process in any application for some grant, for some project, or for some position at the institution. But it should be also include some quantitative approach which can help those committee to make final decision. And I think the Serbian case is quite in accordance with this, because at the moment, as you know, we are using usually some reviewers for some funding programs, or even for your, let's say, promotion to the higher position, there is some committee. But there are some minimal criteria which you have to achieve. And those minimal criteria are usually defined as some quantitative metrics, such as the number of papers published in a journal with impact factors or something like that. Of course, we can discuss how those quantitative metrics are defined, but basically we are in accordance with this approach, which is defining that qualitative and quantitative approach should be mixed and used together to make the best final decision. Regarding some supporting infrastructure, basically, the institutions are using the different sources for research assessment process. It might be some, let's say, the in-house developed solution, or it might be some global solutions. And we write the questions about that in our surveys, and you can see here the results. But basically, so there is a combination of the local sources and the global sources in the research assessment process. Which means that the global sources and local sources should exchange the informations to make it one common, let's say, space for research assessment, which can then support the research assessment practice. In order to do that, there are some challenges. So I think that the GraspOS result will be, let's say, a recommendation of some federated infrastructure of different elements which are actually exchanging the message in order to support the, let's say, the research assessment process. It's very important that we establish the standardization of cataloging formats and practices across the different systems, and as well as adoption of persistent identifiers, as already mentioned by Biana, and to improve the, let's say, the protocols and application interface for training information. So Natalia, I suppose I have just a couple of minutes more, right? So I will try to complete as soon as possible. Sorry. So we need constantly funding. It's very important for decision makers to know that we need the funding of research software infrastructure. So it's not free of charge. Even if it's open source, it's not free of charge because it needs maintaining. Here you can see some table of supported at the moment persistent identifiers in some global platforms, as well as some very popular models such as Serif and Vivo. Here we have the diversity of different, let's say, the output types in different global platforms. The similar situation is also in the local in-house solutions across Europe, as well as different activities and roles which might be part of the research assessment process. And of course, not all aspects of open science are supported in available infrastructure, such as participation in some, let's say, courses linked to the open science or something like that, or some events and so on. And the implication of Serbian Academy, just briefly, we are happy that in this project we have the representative from Serbia. So besides me, which I'm hired, as I said, as an expert, but I'm not representing any institution from Serbia, but University of Belgrade and Faculty of Chemistry is one partner in the project. They are developing the Cherry platform, which is based on a DSpace. And I think it's really great that we have a Serbian voice there, which means that Serbian assessment context will be taken into the consideration in defining the, GraspOS results, such as Open Science Assessment Framework. And of course, at the end, the application of GraspOS results can be tried in the Serbian context in this Cherry platform. And here you can find some ideas as pilot activities for the University of Belgrade and Faculty of Chemistry, how to improve the Cherry application. they're planning to include some, let's say, badges for measuring how some researcher is acting in accordance with open access practices. As well, they're trying to improve the platform to support cataloging participation in the open science seminars, and also to try to follow some monitoring and rewarding practices for institutions, not just for researchers. And that's all. Apologies for a little bit longer presentation.
Thank you very much, Dragan. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation, which links really well to the obviously global context of QARA. That's the one thing, but also for our European efforts to join forces and work towards fair standards and general standardization within the EOSC framework as such. So I think it fits really well. And altogether we will reach that goal. However, we know that the assessment systems are obviously very challenging as well, and there are many issues, and I hope we will raise these questions in the discussion part. So far, I cannot see any questions in the questions and answers from the participant side. Obviously, you are very welcome to put the questions over there. We will also give you the voice later on during the discussion. So if any questions come up, the challenging one especially we like, so please do put them in writing or later on orally. Now I would like to move on to Maaike Verburg, who is the representative of DANS, Data Archiving and Network Services from the Netherlands. She's research data management specialist, focusing her work on sharing expertises on data management, fair data, and open science in general, but her main focus is fair metrics, assessment, repository trustworthiness, and training. In the Fair Impact project, she is a co-leader of the work package on metrics certification and guidelines. And today she will present the implementing metrics for automated fair digital object assessment in a disciplinary context, and she will focus on the social sciences and humanities use case. So Maaike, the screen and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Yes, so I would like to share a bit more about the different activities that Fair Impact is undertaking in the area of metrics and assessment with a focus on FAIR. And as Natalia already said, I will delve into a specific use case in social science to show you some recent work and ongoing developments that I'm very excited to share with you. So as a little bit of background, after the initial presentation of the FAIR principles, which is almost 10 years ago now, we have seen growing expectations and desires to monitor and evaluate the fairness of research objects so that we know where we are and where we can grow to. And in these last years, we've seen an incredible boom of the creation of different metrics and different tools that can help us to achieve this, to get us to a starting point and to help us improve and better understand how we can facilitate this. And we observe a huge diversity in these tools and metrics, with each having different aims and different target objects, different audiences, and of course, different interpretations of the FAIR principles, which in their original state can be somewhat vague and global and need to be translated into something that is measurable and accessible by a machine, by a tool. So we see this huge diversity, which is great to see. We also see efforts to harmonize again, to get back together and see how we can make sure that results and tools are better understandable and clearly displaying their results and their implications. So we are very much in a hub of activity currently, and Fair Impact is also very much contributing to that. We are trying to be active in a lot of areas here. On the slide below, you can see a couple of the logos from the tools that we are working on within the project. So we have Fuji, OFAIR, FOOPS, and FairAware, which are all also very different tools from each other. Generally speaking, if you categorize tools in their main objectives, you can see that we either have tools that assess FAIR enabling qualities of repositories or other organizations, assessment of the objects themselves and their fairness, or tools that focus more on general education about the FAIR principles and about how to turn the principles into practices, and how researchers or data stewards or other data professionals can engage and apply the FAIR principles. Because as you recall in Ingrid's presentation, taking the step from knowing about the FAIR principles and putting them into practice can be quite daunting for a lot of people, and it's not happening so much yet. So you can see that there are tools trying to focus on all these different kinds of areas to bring everything closer together. So what FAIR Impact does is in line with our main objectives that Ingrid also presented before. We are trying to broaden the scope of the assessment tools and the metrics, because we see that currently there is a main focus on data only, but we know that research software and semantic artifacts can also be assessed on FAIR, and it is very important that we do so because we also want to know how we are doing in those areas. So in FAIR Impact, we are trying to contribute to creating metrics for those different research objects, identifying what makes them different from data and identifying what makes them not so different from data after all, and trying to express that in metrics and also in the practical implementation of some tools. So you see that each line of objects is at a different stage. So with data, they are very much advanced and there are different tools already available. For research software, we have the FAIR principles for research software that we are now working to translate into metrics. And for semantic artifacts, the developments are a bit slower or started a bit later. So we are working on creating a methodology on which metrics can be built. So you can see these different steps ongoing that we are all trying to pay attention to. Then we also have the focus on creating discipline-specific metrics and tests, which is what I will talk about in a bit more depth later. And lastly, one of our focuses in this area of the FAIR Impact project is also to make sure that the tools that we have are flexible and open and can be adapted by users to really focus on what they find important, or for example, by expressing the language in whatever they prefer, so that everything is more understandable and easy to grasp and easy to apply to your own context. Aside from contributing to the tools themselves, we also look at the wider landscape, because it is all well and good if we have FAIR data and FAIR software and FAIR semantic artifacts, but we also need the services around them that make sure that they can be FAIR and that they can remain FAIR over time. So repositories are very important. And the term repositories has been elongated to reflect a couple of the desirable characteristics. And we now try to refer to them as FAIR enabling trustworthy digital repositories, to reflect that we think it's important that they enable FAIR, so that they have services and processes in place that make sure that the objects can become and stay FAIR over time. And also that they are trustworthy, which means that an end user, a researcher who's trying to deposit as a repository, has enough information about the way the repository works so that they can trust that their data or software or semantic artifacts are in good hands there. So that is really the kind of qualities that we are trying to advance and trying to connect also in the landscape. We are trying to facilitate those kinds of repositories to come together into a network and to communicate with registries or portals in which their information is needed, such as re3 data. So aside from just looking at the tools themselves and the practical assessment of FAIR, we also try to pay attention to the wider landscape and make sure that everything communicates with each other, so that repository and the objects that are in them are also better discoverable for people. So there we also try to link a lot, the same as Biana already showed in the eNauka portal. We try to make sure that the repositories and the objects and every information that we find about them are well connected and communicated to each other, because that's the way that we unite it all into one smoothly operating landscape. So specifically, looking at one of our recent and current activities, I want to tell you a little bit more about how we implement metrics into a disciplinary context. So you see again on this slide that Fair is Fair logo that Ingrid also showed. And to bring you back a little bit to catch you up, in the Fair is Fair project, we created a first set of data object assessment metrics, which were generic interpretations of the FAIR principles, on which tools such as Fuji and FairAware have been built from. These tools have been developed in this project based on the metrics. The metrics have been refined with community input and new developments, but they have remained generic and discipline agnostic with intent. However, it does raise the question, does an assessment that is built on such generic metrics give an accurate result for a data set that is very discipline specific? If, for example, you use metadata standards or file formats that are very specific to your subdomain or micro-discipline that you are active in, that is desirable. The FAIR principles dictate or prescribe that following community standards is always the best way to go. But how can tool developers make sure that their tool knows about all the different metadata standards that are around, which are a lot, and make sure that they recognize them and then award them points for having those standards? That's almost impossible with the amount of standards that are around. So the tools try to look at the more generic and most often used standards, but is that fair to data that is more specific? And that is why we are trying to explore in the FAIR Impact project what it looks like if you interpret metrics for a specific discipline, and if that influences how well a tool can assess a data set. So we have, as Ingrid described, some use cases that are in the project. And for us to work with, we have CEST, which is the Consortium of Social Science Data Archives for Europe, as a partner in our work package to work alongside us and help us develop metrics that are suitable for them. So we are looking at the social sciences and humanities domain, and we are trying to figure out which parts of the generic metrics are too generic for them, which parts need to be more specific, and if they need to be specific, what should they prescribe? What should they contain? So we've used a different couple of approaches. We've done a lot of desk research, trying to figure out what kind of best practices and common standards are used in the social sciences, so mostly in CEST as a consortium, but also wider than that in the social science and humanities as large. We also use the Clearing Network in the Netherlands to have a look at the humanities side and collect everything we can find about what kind of metadata standards, what kind of file formats, what kind of persistent identifiers, licenses, what do they prescribe, what do they use most often, what is common for them. We also collected a couple of FAIR implementation profiles in which archives can showcase what their common practices are. And we analyzed all of that information together and matched them with the original metrics that we had to see where the differences are. And the result of that is that we observed two interesting things here. One is that the social sciences and humanities is too large and too diverse of a discipline to treat as one. So instead, we've decided to zoom in on social sciences alone, and then with a specific focus on what is important to CEST. because it was not possible to find common standards that also apply to all of the humanities. The second interesting observation is that not all metrics have to be specified for the social sciences, and not all metrics can be specified for the social sciences. So you see that in the end, on the left side, you see the original metrics that are generic. And then on the right side, you can see for which metrics we could specify a social science specific formulation. So in some cases, for example, the first couple of principles, you see that assigning a globally unique identifier and a persistent identifier is not something that is different for the social sciences than for the generic metrics. So those metrics can accurately find the right information in social science data sets, we assume currently based on our desk research. But for example, the metadata, the descriptive metadata that is supposed to be included is different. So generically, for example, language is not included in the original metric for this. But CEST does specify that language is one of the minimum metrics that they need to include, which is why we need a specific metric for this, so that we test for the exact metadata elements that CEST prescribes. I won't go through all of them, but you can see that we've identified 5 different metrics that are specific to the social sciences, and the rest can remain generic, or we cannot make specific enough because there's just too much diversity or no clear community norm or standard. So coming from the design of these metrics, the next step is, of course, the implementation into the existing tool. So Fuji already was up and running with the generic metrics, and now we've made a new version of the tool where you can choose to select to either run it with the generic metrics or to run your assessment with the social science metrics. So here you can enter your persistent identifier of the data set and then choose which one of the metrics you want to apply. I need to give a disclaimer that though this is currently live and you can see it and test it, it is still very much in development. So we are trying to improve it over the coming months to make it more stable and effective. But you can have a look at what this does for your social science data set. And that is what we will also be doing. We have collected a reference collection of data sets, which we will run through the generic metrics and the social science specific metrics and have a look at the differences between them and report then on what we think is the effect of designing such specific metrics. So the future plans for the rest of the project are to, for data, explore a couple more disciplines. So we are currently working with the earth and environmental sciences, and we also have plans to work on the molecular sciences to do the exact same process again. So to try and design metrics that are specific to their community and implement them into the tool and see how they test on their data sets. And then we will report on our overall exploration and experiences with the discipline-specific assessment and see what our thoughts are on the usability of it and whether it does improve the accuracy and by how much. Other plans are to also create discipline-specific metrics for research software. Those are actually coming out at the end of this month, so it's coming soon. And then we will also look at creating the first assessment test tool for research software. So this will be a new installation of Fuji, where you will no longer just be able to assess data, but also assess research software with the metrics specific to them. So these are all exciting plans for me. And we hope you have a look. If you want to stay updated about all of these events, make sure to sign up for the newsletter. I think Rita shared a link in the chat for that. And don't hesitate to reach out or ask any questions if you have them. Back to Natalia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Maike, for this very interesting information and insight into the tools and services as well. I think this is very important for us because it makes the life easier. But as you said, that should be the quality over the quantity of tools, and this is very important. This is also a huge importance of your project, right? Because as you said, even now, very long name, fair, enabling, trustworthy digital repositories is something that we really need, because in our daily practice, we also somehow try to recognize those repositories, and either we have referee data with over 3,000 repositories, which are not assessed based on the quality. It's more like a register. And then on the other hand, we have obviously core trust seal. And if you compare, for example, Polish registries, repositories, you will have 25 of Polish repositories on the side of referee data, but 1 on the core trust seal. And obviously, choice of 1 is not good enough because it is exactly humanity-based. It is Clarin, Eric repository in Poland. So not much choice for the other disciplines. So I think this network that you've mentioned is very interesting in this context, giving us trustworthy tools and infrastructures. Thank you very much. We will come back to you also in the open discussion time. And now we will move to our next discussion point. It will be OPUS project, Open University Science, which will be presented by 2 speakers. It will be Gareth O'Neill, who is the principal consultant on open science at Technopolis Group in Belgium. He focuses at his work on implementation of open science across Europe, especially on sustainable careers for researchers and reform on research assessment. He is also involved in the development of European Open Science Cloud EOSC. And then the voice will be given to Alina Irimia. She's the Open Science Knowledge Hub leader. For many years, she's very much involved into a foresight activities as a foresight expert within Romanian Executive Agency for Higher Education Research and Innovation Funding. She is also an advisor to the Ministry of National Education and Scientific Research. She is a foresight expert for RDI and open science in the UNESCO Chair on Science and Innovation Policies at the National University of Political Science and Public Administration in Bucharest. I managed. That's a very long name. Okay, so Gareth and Alina, I would like to give you the floor.
Perfect. And just to check, can you hear us okay?
Yes, perfect.
You can. And before we start, just to note, so hello everybody, just to note, we have a QR code on the screen there. So if you want these slides in advance, then shoot away, take a picture of the QR, and we leave that on the screen for 15 seconds, and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
So last chance, and go ahead, Alina.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. So I'm here with this hat of the OPUS project, but I'm also, I would like to mention, I'm also involved with the Fair Impact project and also the GraspOS project mentioned today by Dragan. So my role is to give a helicopter view of the OPUS project, Open and Universal Science Project, the acronym OPUS, which is a coordination and support action to develop measures to support the reform on research assessment, with a specific focus on RPOs and RFOs to facilitate a system which will incentivize and reward researchers for the open science practices. So the work of the project will also focus on developing indicators, metrics, as well as interventions for open science. The project has an overall budget of around 2 million euros. You can see here a lower budget because it doesn't take into account here on the slide the budget of the UK partner, because initially there wasn't an agreement with Horizon Europe for them to be involved directly. The project started in September 1st, 2022, and will end in August 31st, 2026. You will see here an overview of the key stakeholders, which were intentionally selected to cover key areas in the RDI system, specifically the research assessment part. So we have Technopolis, VITE, the Area Access Career Development Center in the UK, UNESCO. We have the voice of the researcher organization, which is a critical voice in the project. And for that, we have partners like ICORSA, the International Consortium of Research Staff Association. We have the MCAA, the Marie Curie Alumni Association, and EuroDoc, the European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers. And also really important is that we have RPOs and RFOs involved with their specific profiles in the development of the work of the projects to provide critical input, but also trial-specific activities. We have the involvement of Jeroen, the Young European Research Universities Network, with its 3 members universities, Nova, Lisboa, University of Rijeka, and from Croatia, and University of Cyprus. And we also have 2 RFOs, national RFOs, Research Council of Lithuania, and FECDI, my institution, which has this long acronym. It's the main funder of research in Romania, but also policy advisor to the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Research, Development and Innovation in terms of RDI and open science policies. We also have experts from Vilnius University dealing with gender equality. Resolvo is ensuring the project management, and Plokan, the oceanic platform of the Canary Islands, is the coordinator of the project. Here you can see an image, a snapshot of the work packages, and the work is mainly thought to be implemented in simple stages, starting from a state of art where we are now in terms of open science and research assessment. For that, a vast literature review has been carried out. Then in stage 2, the project developed interventions and indicators and metrics for open science and interventions needed to support open science. Then there's the step of rounds of consultations with key stakeholders to provide input feedback on the work on indicators and interventions, and also trials with the RPOs and RFOs which are involved in the project. So after this stage, the input, the feedback on the work will conduct to updating the framework, and also all the results will eventually be showed in policy briefs by the end of the project. And now for the most exciting part of the work, I will hand over to Garrett.
Thanks, Alina. If you can jump to the next slide, and I'm aware of the time. I think we're slightly over, so I will see if I can shorten this a bit so we can get straight into the discussion. So in a nutshell, what we want to do in the project is add to the discussion that's now ongoing on research assessment, more specifically for us, researcher assessment, looking at the individuals, not necessarily the institutions, or even larger at the member state activities on this. And we want to link up, obviously, to the activities that are now going on in Kowara and within the COARA working groups. And in that sense, I think we're slightly ahead in digging in deep into puzzling out this form of assessment for researchers. What we have done already is propose a first version of a so-called researcher assessment framework. And what this essentially is a toolbox or a set of Lego bricks, if you will, for organizations to start thinking about how to reform researcher assessment. And some of the guidelines that we have picked there, essentially leading to a whole shopping list of potential indicators, metrics, and interventions that can be used and adapted or adjusted to the specific institutions. So the 10 principles which we have been working with to get to this first version of the framework are the following on the screen. I will go through them, and I think this is where the discussion is. So number one, we've aimed to have an optional set of indicators and metrics for RPOs and RFOs. So not a prescribed set and not set in stone, but essentially options that they have to start thinking about, reflecting upon, and adjusting as they see fit. Number two, this framework for us applies or should apply across countries, across disciplines, and across organizations. So it's not intended for any one specific RPO or RFO or a specific discipline or a specific country. It tries to take all of these into account, and that also, of course, affects the level of description that's there in the framework and what is proposed. Number three, it combines both a quantitative and qualitative approach to assessment. So we see that assessment currently and predominantly has focused on quantitative assessment, especially very specifically on bibliometrics linked to publications, whether that's in high impact factor journals or with a specific journal impact factor, or specific prestigious journals or citations linked to those publications. In any case, it's been quite skewed. And what we are adopting in the project is a more combined approach where you may take quantitative indicators and metrics into account, but you must include a qualitative aspect to this, a qualitative contextualization or a qualitative description of any indicators and metrics that you're using. We leave flexibility there in how quantitative or how qualitative the actual organizations want to go. Again, we cannot mandate them to do anything, so this is really up to them to how they implement this. We simply provide them with the options. But just to note here that the numbers in our view are quite useless without any form of qualitative description. So you must minimally have qualitative and quantitative in the approach we're taking. Number four, we focus on the assessment of individual researchers. That's for the scope of our project and for the scope of our work. You could take this framework and adapt it to include assessment of teams or groups or units, or even scale up to a university or organizational level. We don't do that, however. We simply keep it for now to the focus on researchers and how this could be used in the evaluation of researchers, whether that's applying for a grant or applying for a job position, or whether that's monitoring or trying to provide input to the project development or their own career progression. Number five is on the activities done by researchers. Typically, researchers are rewarded for their publications, or more specifically for their research activities. And in what we propose here is a full spectrum of activities looking across all the work that's done by researchers. They spend time across activities. They spend a lot of their effort outside of just the research activities. So we want to make sure that this is included, or at least taken into account in their assessment, so that the researchers can find themselves in the evaluation for the work that they've done. 6 and 7 are related. We've taken two approaches. First of all, we've taken a generic framework for both open and non-open activities. It does not specify whether the activities are open or not. And then we have specifically taken that generic framework and targeted it on open science. So specifically looking at the open activities that the researchers do. So at any given point, an institution has the options available to them. They can look at the generic framework, or perhaps look at what they're already implementing generically, and then where they have specific interests or needs for open science, then they can turn it around, let's say, flip the coin and start focusing on open science and look for the examples that they can implement for open science. Number 8, we've different types of indicators. We've broken them down into those indicators that deal with processes or activities that are ongoing, those that deal with actual outputs, concrete outputs, and those that deal with outcomes, or rather specific immediate or short-term outcomes. We do not look at the long-term impact in this assessment. We felt that was outside of the scope of the work we're doing. And we do note that there's other projects working on this, such as, for instance, Pathos, which is looking at impact pathways for open science. Number 9, coming to an end, we formulate the formulation that we use in the description for the indicators, metrics, and the interventions is set at a somewhat high level of description. We don't want to end up with 10,000 different indicators focused on all specific instantiations. So we try to keep it high level, looking across the different activities that we've proposed. And we leave, again, the refinement or further development of these indicators, metrics, and interventions to the organizations. And 10, repeating what I've said several times, we leave the selection, refinement, and prioritization to the organizations. We do not tell them what they should pick or how they should implement it. We simply give them the toolbox. We give them some options and examples, which we'll do later on in the project. And then we let them ultimately adjust this to their own needs and their interests. Next slide, please, Elena. So taking a broad approach and looking down on all the different activities that we've proposed, we've broken this up for now into 4 categories. Note this may change. This is just our first version. It will go to consultation with the community and key stakeholders. It will also be trialed in pilots, including Alina's organization that we have in the project. And essentially, we will adjust this and revise it for a final version from what we've learned and all the input that we've received. In any case, we've 4 categories: research, education, leadership, and valorization. And then under that, we have specific activities which we've identified that are critical for all of those categories. And we have grouped relevant indicators, metrics, and interventions according to these specific categories. So research obviously focusing on key aspects of research, such as in the proposals, methodologies, data, software, publications, materials, noting that this can be across disciplines, including the arts and humanities. Education, we're looking at courses developing or resources or materials, the teaching itself, supervision of students, as well as personal professional skills development. Leadership, this looks at managing or leading people, projects, units within organizations. It could be an institute, a center, a faculty, a university, as well as other forms of recognition from the community for their work, such as awards or such as invitations to specific boards, expert groups, advisory boards, and so forth. Valorization is a broad category. This looks at the communication in terms of both public and peer professional communication, whether that's in writing or speaking or other digital formats. We also look at engaging across sectors, so intersectoral engagement in both the public, private, third sector, as well as with citizens specifically. And we look at the exploitation of the research in terms of innovation, exploitation, patenting, and so forth. Next slide, Alina. Yes, that way. Just to give an example of one specific set, let's say, of potential indicators for course development. Again, it's phrased quantitative here, but doesn't have to be quantitative. On the top, you see a box that looks more generically at developing courses, programs, trainings. We leave flexibility for the interpretation of these words, such as courses. There's different types of indicators that you can use. So here we look at the courses that are being developed at a given point of an evaluation. You may not have finished it, but it's still in development. We look at the courses that have actually been finalized and are ready to be implemented. And we look at the number of courses or just simply the best courses that have been implemented. If you flip this to an open component, then you see slightly different dimensions. That's the box underneath. So here we look at the number of open science courses that are in development or finalized or implemented. And we look at the number of courses generally that have been made openly available, whether they're openly available at the time of development, openly available as they've been finalized, or openly available as they are being implemented. So that's one example of a specific indicator group that we have. Next slide, please, Alina. And final slide, I believe. And just to wrap up, we also, with this framework of indicators and metrics, we have provided or are providing examples of actions or activities or interventions that the RPOs and RFOs can deploy to implement this framework and push for the reform of research assessment. So if you adopt such a framework, or if you even more specifically adopt such examples of indicators and metrics, then these are potential interventions that the RPO or RFO should deploy to support this. And we break this across 5 main categories. This is policy, resource, repository, awareness, and materials. And then, of course, broken across the different categories that we have. Next slide, Alina. I will stop there so we can finish a bit earlier for discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very Alina and Garrett. It was an excellent presentation of your project, which was very interesting also to me, was the selection, the flexible selection option for the indicators, so because it doesn't make it too difficult for the, let's say, the national context to implement. It will be like more cherry picking, right? At least to adjust it to the national context, which is essentially very important, because we all know how we struggle if we have like, you know, very concrete and unflexible frameworks. That's the first thing. What I caught from the last presentation is that in a way, the Fair is Fair project was also based on the generic and let's say cross-disciplines framework, right, or approach. But now it is going to research domains, right, because it turned out that we need to adjust a little bit the metrics to the disciplines. So are you not worried about that? We are doing very generic, but the generic and cross-discipline framework then might be not sufficient for the research domains.
Absolutely. So, and that's the point. So that's where the flexibility comes in. So the first part there is that we have seen the organizations push back against a one-size-fits-all framework. It just does not work. It doesn't work within a small number of organizations, never mind a country. We have 5 pilots in Opus, and they have made different selections of what we've proposed for their trials. So you already see in their selections the different interests and needs and the different priorities that they set. So flexibility is the key. Now, for the disciplines, we did not break it down into the disciplines. When we look at what you've already seen, the different categories we have 4 categories broken down into subcategories, right? Each of them has a potential indicator group, which breaks it across process, output, outcome, which doubles it if you put in open science. So you come to quite a shopping list of high-level indicators and metrics. Mm-hmm. If we were then to refine this for each of the disciplines or sub-disciplines or specific fields, you end up with an insane amount of specified indicators, right? Completely unusable. It's even arguable if we've already too many, and if we should cut down. So what we have, what we suspect here and what we've seen is we try to phrase it, we make sure we have the right categories, the right activities, and we phrase it at the right level. So a specific discipline, for instance, can adjust it. So where we have, for instance, materials, when arts and humanities colleagues come and say, what do I do with my sculptures? We can fit it there. We've left flexibility in the definition. It's up to them if they want to further specify the type of indicators or metrics that they're using, or if they want to keep it at a high level, but simply give examples or guidelines for how they should fill it in, which can focus on the discipline. So we've taken the lighter approach. We try to say less is better, keep it at a high level, but make sure we have the right phrasing and formulation so colleagues can find themselves somewhere here and interpret it, and if they want, break it down into other indicators and metrics, adjust them, or not touch it at all, but just simply provide clear guidelines so the researchers know what to fill in, or those collecting the data know what to fill in.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Now we have some questions which I am very glad about. Some of them are answered, but I would like to ask the audience, as we are coming to the open discussion point. It is open discussion on rewarding open science practices in the career development. However, we could come back to all the presentations that have been already taken place. Is anyone willing from the audience or from the speakers, is it anyone willing to take a voice and ask the question? If the audience would like to ask the question or raise any issue, we just need to raise your hand and we will unmute you then. And maybe just give me a second, because I cannot see any hands. Yes, there are a couple of questions, but Maike already responded to them. Maike, but could you come back to the questions and maybe give us the response out loud?
Yes, of course. So there are 2 questions on, one is more specific to my presentation, and one I think is one that sort of rings around all the presentations. So I'll
Yes.
start with the specific question, which was about the social science metrics for the fair assessment. And the question was, in the image where I showed side by side the generic ones and the social science ones, it was very clear that we did not have any social science metrics for the whole of the accessibility principle. So the question was whether social science data sets would then not be assessed on accessibility, or how this could be. So I wanted to clarify maybe a little bit that the intent of the social science metrics is that where there are social science metrics, the data set would be assessed on those. And if there aren't any specified for the social science, we would refer back to the generic ones, because we either identified that the generic ones were suited enough, which is the case for some of those accessibility metrics. So for example, the licenses or the more specific principles in that category don't differ too much from the generic recommendations or the things that the tool tests when it tests the generic metrics. So that's why we did not specify any social science specific ones, but instead the data sets would then be analyzed or assessed using the original metrics. So currently the metrics are split, but we want to bring them back together so that you still assess a data set on all the principles that are there, so that you get a full picture of it. So I hope that clarifies a little bit about the new metrics. And then the other question is a bit more generic, I think, or I think we can make it more generic, about the concept of assessment at all, especially assessment with scores, I think, or assessment with percentages or pass or fail, or any kind of system where you apply green, orange, red, or any labels about maturity or about scoring. There's always the concern about gamification and this concern about whether assessment is what we need, or whether it is really more the improvement and the assistance and the considerations of how it can be better instead of just the score, which is something I completely agree with, and I think we heard a lot of in the other presentations as well. So maybe I can invite others to share their opinion as well about the topic.
Yes.
I'm happy to start if you want to,
Yes,
if you
Gareth.
want somebody to kick it off. So I'm not so focused on the scores. I think we need to be clear what we're talking about when we say assessment. Assessment of who and assessment of what. Assessment of who, are we talking about researchers? Are we talking about groups? Are we talking about institutions? Are we talking higher up at national, state level? And the what, are we talking about the assessment of researchers applying for a grant evaluation? Are we talking about the assessment of researchers applying for a career or a position, temporary or permanent, or tenure track? Or are we talking about the assessment of researchers on a project to track their implementation of the project and that they've spent the money as agreed in a grant agreement? Or are we tracking the progression of the researcher within a specific function, temporary or permanent? They're not the same type of assessment. And certainly when you have to pick researchers, you must, to some extent, rank them, whether you give them a score or whether you say this one is better than the other, but you must rank them. If the ranking is needed for progression of a project or career, I think that's much less. But again, if it's about going for a tenure track position or maintaining your position, you again, of course, have to set some standards for the researcher. It's typically not just a question of how can we help them, but critically, in many cases, is this the researcher for this position or grant? And is this researcher more or less doing what they agreed to do in their job? This is a job after all.
You, Gareth? Anyone would like to continue?
So I can add a couple of words about this. So as I already mentioned in my presentation, we found that the best is to combine, to mix, let's say, the qualitative and quantitative data in an approach in assessment. I think I also noticed that in the Garrett and Lena presentation, one line mentioning that the qualitative and quantitative data should be combined. And I agree, there is always some gamification if you introduce any quantification, quantitative parameter. And I think it's responsibility on the side of the policymakers. So when you are making some rule book for assessment in one country for application for some position or for some funding program, of course, you are shaping science in your country. And you're also producing, I think, these gamifications in some way. So if you, let's say, change the rule that publishing in a requesting more collaboration, then the collaboration patterns might change. Or if you specify that some certain number of papers presented at the domestic conference or international conference are needed, then the researcher can change the way how they are behaving and how they are, let's say, publishing their own papers and so on.
Yes, if I could add on to the discussion, like I can give you the case of Poland. We have very different assessment systems. As far as our research agency is concerned, for example, we assigned DORA, and we, for a very long time, we thought, how to assess the research now, if not impact factor, then what? If not any other quantitative indicator, then how should we have reviewers of articles to find out how to value those articles? And in fact, it was kind of a surprise for all, because the institutions have their own way of assessing, the government has their own system of assessment, and now National Science Center implemented completely new vision of scientific assessment. And in fact, now our researchers in Poland now have three, and in fact, they work in the three different assessment systems, right? So this is a challenge for them, and that's why we have to be very responsible. Yes, responsible research assessment, how we introduce it, do we do it? And this is obviously excellent. Our integrated or collaboration in assessment across Europe, globally as COARA, right? But also within EOSC, where we are trying to think how to approach it, because at the end of the day, it is also what Liliana said before, our researchers will be or should be visible abroad, should be visible not only in the country, but also they should be visible globally. This is what is our goal as a, obviously, national funding agency. And this is obviously, there are other reasons like personal development. And then I will come back to Garrett. This is an excellent question also, what level of assessment, because we have still the self-assessment issues. So how much the structural and system-prone assessment system will be then implemented by the researchers themselves, how they will evaluate themselves. Because now I can see from our perspective that we have three different systems and they have to cope. They may agree with one or the other, but they also has to need some values or indicators, however you like, to assess themselves and their own work. Are they value themselves based on impact factor, or are they value themselves based on the open access publications and open data sets? This is a big question, but this is a question of changing research culture, right? This is something else. This is deeper. And we may change it at the structural level, which is sometimes, it's obviously not easy. But then we will go on also to the research culture issues and individual level.
Right, just to maybe follow up on the words you've used, values, because there's a couple of other dimensions that need to be taken into account here. And I'll focus again on what we know best, which is the researcher level. But number one, in terms of values, we had some guiding principles to develop our framework. Mm-hmm. You could pull out some values there, but we've critically, for now, do not go into the bigger detail of the value system in place at the institution. How do they see assessment? How do they see evaluation? How do they see implementing such a reform, right? How do they see qualitative versus quantitative? How do they see the usage of indicators or metrics, whether it's more quantitative or otherwise? So we don't go into the values. We note, for instance, that there are existing frameworks like the SCOPE framework for research evaluation, but critically, we're just looking at the toolbox of options to start thinking about it and start working it into your assessment framework, right? The second thing is the translation. So this framework that we're proposing is a framework. It's not exactly how it would look in implementation. Each institution, once they've picked what they like from it, pick the indicators, metrics, interventions, and fine-tune them, they still need to translate it to researchers. Is that in the form of a document? Is it in the form of a survey? Is it in the form of a questionnaire? Is it a digital interface? What questions do they ask? What guidelines do they give? How do they bundle the questions? So it has to be translated in a different manner. And the last one is the data source. Who provides the data? Typically, it would be the researcher filling in an old doc form, or it could be the researcher filling in the data. But critically, and hopefully in the future, it could be coming from internal data collection systems such as CRISP, auto-pulling some of the relevant numbers or information that the researcher can use and check if it's correct, or at least use as a support to them. Or it could be external data sources, potentially, if you're looking at publications, data, software, pulling this number from online indexes or online repositories to help, again, contextualize the work that the researcher's done. So again, we have to kind of set not just the framework of what we're talking about with evaluation, but then how do we actually translate this in terms of the values, in terms of the questionnaires that would be asked, in terms of the data.
Okay, thank you very much.
Shall I say something about, again, from the Serbian perspective? And I'm thinking about that this is all about break of decision makers. Okay, I will try to explain in one example, which I noticed happened in Serbia. Okay, the researchers are ranking according to these numbers because this is the cheapest way to rank somebody. This is cheapest. You could collect the data from somewhere, just make some list, putting some people on the first, second, etc. Because if we move to the qualitative data, it costs. And the researcher does not have enough time to reviewing. Nevertheless, they are doing reviewing for the articles, for the journals, free of charge. Okay, so there are some costs. But let's explain a little bit more deeply. Okay, the one of the rule book for our PhD candidates is to publish an article in a high-ranking journal. Okay, all PhD candidates, they want to satisfy that condition. How do they satisfy? And they want to do it on time, because everybody wants to do their PhD on time. Okay, so they are publishing open access journals with very, very high APCs fees. I know how much Serbian authors spend on year base on the APC. This is huge amount of money. Majority of them are young researchers looking to publish this paper, which is obligatory, mandatory, before the PhD defense. Okay, so if the, let's say, some working group on the higher education decided, okay, this is not the rule, but the reviewers must, mentors and that kind, advisors, must do their job properly, there will be no condition to do this, and we will move this amount of money to the reviewers. Okay, because in all these, let's say, like Milica said, gamification, there are also another stakeholder which is completely private sector, which is publisher, commercial. So this is how I'm thinking, and this is we have very brave people, let's say, just to change this one. But this is the practice with what is happening, and I'm sure this is happening also in the career development, etc.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Unfortunately, we have to finish as we are a little bit behind the schedule. So now I would like to move on to the last but not least presentation. It will be the presentation of Joy Davidson. who is the Associate Director for UK's Digital Curation Centre, which is a research infrastructure that specializes in the data management, planning, curation, and open science. Joy currently leads work on policies and practices, which is a work package free within EC-founded project Fair is Fair, which aims to increase the production and use of fair data. She is also involved in reviews of S3 roadmaps, updates, and Horizon 2020 research infrastructure funding programs. And Joy will introduce us to the topic of fair impact open calls. It was promised to us, Joy, so the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Natalia. And sorry to disrupt the really useful conversation there. So I'll try to keep it very brief and get you out on time. So we're just going to end today by giving you a little bit of information on another bit of Fair Impact's work. And this is a series of open calls that we have to try and support the adoption of fair practices. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. I just wanted to reiterate, I think you heard a little bit about this from Ingrid, but really Fair Impact is all about trying to increase the adoption of fair enabling tools, practices, and approaches. So we have a large chunk of our work is really about trying to support people to do this. We have 3 dedicated routes to help people on their fair enabling journeys. The first route, route 1, is through some dedicated guidance and one-to-one support. So this is where people work with a team of mentors to really start to look at their practices and try to plan to improve. Route 2 is for those who might be a little bit further advanced on their fair enabling journey. And this is where they get a little bit of financial support to test out specific tools or approaches or solutions, and to be able to get really essentially the time to allow them to do this. So the money helps to buy out their time to take part in these small projects. And the third route for us is the most broad, and that is a series of public fair implementation workshops. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So we currently have a call out at the moment for Route 1 support. We have 3 different support programs that are on offer. There is one aimed at research performing organizations, which I'm leading. There's another support program aimed primarily at those people who run repositories and data services. And there's this third support strand, which is aimed at those kind of organizations that are working to progress things on a national level. So we have in these 3 different programs, a fairly basic approach where, as I said, you will be working with a team of Fair Impact mentors. And the idea is that we will help you to carry out a supported self-assessment as to where you are now, and to start to develop plans for moving forward and trying to plan to become more fair enabling. Key part of this approach that we have developed is engagement, because I think there's too much of a focus sometimes on thinking if you have the right tool or infrastructure in place that the problems will solve themselves. And our experience has really been that it's the engagement that really is the important bit. You really need to know how you're going to make sure that everybody knows what infrastructure you're providing and when and how to make use of it. So engagement is a really big part of the support program, and we will help you to come up with an engagement strategy. Those support programs, again, are really keen to share the knowledge between peers, because we have some answers, but we don't have all of them. We're all finding our way together. So we've made sure that these programs have a fair amount of time dedicated to exchange between the peers who are taking part. So as I mentioned, we can move on to the next slide, please. That's great. So we have the call is open now, and you can see on the top line in the gray section of the slide, there are the 3 support actions, and you're able to come and apply to each of these if any of these are of interest. You just can fill out an application form and say a little bit about who you are and why you want to be involved. It's a fairly lightweight application process. We've tried to keep the burden quite low, but the deadline for getting your applications in for this current open call for these 3 support programs is November 1st. So coming up in about 3 weeks. I think it's probably worth mentioning that we will have a kind of virtual clinic for anybody who's interested in learning more about the support programs. There's information on the website, but if you want to come along on October 18th, you can register to take part in one of these sessions as well. Oh, I think we've lost our slide deck, but hopefully that's not too big of a deal. I don't know, Rita, is there a problem with the slides? Oh, there we go. Thank you very much, Rita.
Just sharing the virtual clinic you were talking about, because I believe they are not on the slides. So this is the event Joy was mentioning.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, perfect. That's great. Yep, you can register. It's just an hour-long session, very informal. You can drop in and ask any questions you might have about the program or the application process. And we can go back to the slides now.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Let's go
Thanks.
here.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the next slide as well, please. So that is our kind of Route 1 support. I'll very briefly just say that we have Route 2 because I'm taking up the last few minutes. Again, this is where we're working to give people a little bit of money to buy out their time to try particular tools and approaches. So this is just an example of the first open call that we had for this kind of support. It opened in March 2023, and we had 2 support actions, one to try a series of different fairness assessment tools and to try and understand what they all tell you and to be able to kind of put together a plan for improvement based on pooling the information that you get. The second was trying to use 2 different approaches in a combined way, fair signposting and RO Crate, to try and improve content and metadata discovery and consumption. So again, these are different. They're targeted to those who are maybe a little bit more advanced on their fair enabling journeys. And as I said, you get a little bit of money to help you to take part. And also you'll have some benefit from the support providers giving you some guidance and expertise. I think we can move. Oh, I'll just say the next call for those opens on the 31st of January 2024. So keep an eye out on the website for details. And the last one I'll just pick up here. We have these series of public workshops that are open to anyone to join. The first one of these is actually happening tomorrow morning. So if anybody's interested, feel free to join us. And this is tomorrow's session will be showing you some work that's happening at the national level in Denmark to support fair adoption. So we've got a good range of speakers who are coming to explain what's happening there. And we're hoping that people who join these sessions will get some inspiration on things that they might be able to replicate in their own countries or organizations. So feel free to join us for that. And as I said, this is the first in the series, so there will be more coming over the next 18 months or so. We're looking to try to get to at least 1 or 2 per month. So I think we can move on to the next slide. Yeah, and I think that's basically a very quick run through of the support that we're offering. And if you do have any questions about any of those, you can get in touch with us through the Fair Impact website. There's a dedicated web form for the open calls and the support. So if you didn't get what you were looking for today and you still have questions, you can contact me directly or go through our help desk. And with that, I will pass over back to Natalia so she can have a minute to wrap up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you for keeping the discipline. You were the most disciplined participant and speaker. Wonderful. We are very grateful. And thank you very much for your insight into the opportunities that are coming regarding FAIR projects. I think this is exactly what we need to exchange good practices and see what's out there and what has turned out to be successful, like, you know, to advance with our practices at the national level, especially in the widening countries, which are still often looked for their own way to create and implement policies and strategies. So thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation and excellent opportunities for us all and for our audience as well. So you are very welcome. You have received links where you can get some more information regarding the project and regarding the events and calls that are currently on and that will be coming. So thank you very much. And now my last words, probably, dear speakers, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and experience, giving us an insight into both national landscape, national Serbian landscape of open science, but also assessment system, and also European use cases, European practices, projects, and collaboration. It was an excellent overview of what open science is, how various stakeholders we are having, how we try to and we do share our experiences and best practices, working towards common standards, common fair standards, which should be a global practice. And that would make also our assessment system and rewarding applying open science much easier and much effective. I would like to also, obviously, thanks to our audience today for staying with us, asking questions, and attending Fair Impact Roadshow in Serbia. I hope you will it will help you to enhance your open science experience in the future. And finally, Rita and Sarah, thank you for your organizational efforts and technical support. I would like to just briefly mention that the presentation will be available online, the video from this webinar as well. And to end this meeting, I would like to wish you all good afternoon and good luck with your open science and research assessment practices and projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia.
Thanks,
I'd
Natalia.
just like to add
Thanks,
that
all.
all the presentations are already available online on the event page and on the note that the recording we expect to be available by the end of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution.